Hey everyone, excited for another deep dive with us. We're going to be looking at scaffolding for English language learners today. It's more interesting than it sounds, I promise.
It really is. We're using the book Scaffolding for English Language Learners, ZPD in practice, to guide our discussion today. And there's some really practical stuff in here.
Okay, so scaffolding, what is that? Like just helping students?
Well, it's a little more specific than just helping. It's more like, giving them that extra support to get them going and then kind of backing off as they can do things on their own.
So is there like a good metaphor for that?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like scaffolding on a building. You need it while you're building the structure, but once it's strong enough, it comes down.
Oh, okay, so you're saying it's temporary support.
Exactly.
Eh.
And to figure out what kind of support, we need to know where the learner is at, right?
Yeah, how do we know like when to give support and when to back off?
That's where this guy, Lev Vygotsky, comes in. Ever heard of him?
Maybe?
Hmm.
Refresh my memory.
Okay, so he had this idea about the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. And the idea is that students learn best when they're working in that zone between what they can already do and what they can do with a little help.
Okay, starting to get it now. So the ZPD is kind of like that sweet spot for learning, and scaffolding is what we use to get them there.
Right, exactly. It's like, building a bridge to help them reach their potential.
And does it have any examples we can talk about?
Yeah. So there's this student, Sarah. She can write like a simple paragraph, but when she has to write a persuasive essay, she just gets stuck.
Okay, so that gap between her current skills and being able to write a good persuasive essay, that's her ZPD.
Yes.
And scaffolding would be like, I don't know, giving her an outline. Not writing it for her, obviously, but helping her get there.
Right, like breaking it down into smaller steps, or even like, modeling how to write a strong argument. And then as she gets better, you slowly take away those supports.
Gotcha. And this seems like it could be especially helpful for English language learners because they're dealing with so much at once. New language, new culture, everything's new.
Absolutely, it can be really overwhelming for them.
So when we're scaffolding for English language learners,
Yeah.
what are some things we need to keep in mind? I mean, are there specific challenges they face?
Oh, for sure. Like, they might need extra help with vocabulary or grammar, or even understanding like cultural references.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So what are some specific techniques that teachers can use to scaffold for these students? Like what would that look like in the classroom?
Well, one really effective technique is modeling. Like instead of just explaining something, you show them how to do it.
I like that. Show, don't tell, right? So like if you're teaching idioms, you could act out a conversation using those idioms.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great idea. And it's not just for speaking, right? Teachers can model reading strategies, writing techniques.
Oh, yeah, pretty much anything.
I bet that makes a big difference. What else? What other techniques can teachers use?
Well, prompts and cues can be really helpful too. They're kind of like, little nudges to help students get started or to keep them on track.
So like instead of staring at a blank page, they have a starting point. That makes a lot of sense, especially for English language learners who might feel intimidated by a writing assignment.
Exactly. And prompts can be anything from, sentence starters to visual aids.
So for like a persuasive essay, you could give them sentence starters like, I believe, or for example.
Yeah, and for grammar, you could use color-coded charts. Visuals are always helpful.
Visuals, yes. And speaking of visuals, I bet real objects would be really useful for teaching vocabulary.
Oh, absolutely. Like if you're teaching about food, bring in some actual fruit.
Exactly. And I bet that would help with remembering the words too.
It makes the learning so much more engaging and accessible.
Okay, so we've got modeling, we've got prompts and cues. What else? What about questioning?
Oh, questioning is super important, but it's not just about, asking any old question. It's about asking the right questions.
Oh yeah, I can see that. So what makes a question a good question in this context?
Well, instead of just giving students the answer, you want to ask questions that guide them to discover the answer on their own.
So it's more about prompting them to think critically and to really engage with the material.
Right. Like instead of saying, what's the main idea of this paragraph? You could ask, what do you think the author is trying to tell us in this paragraph?
It was about getting them to think for themselves. I like that.
And open-ended questions are great for encouraging, discussion and getting students to share their own ideas.
Okay, this is all making sense to me. But why does scaffolding seem to work so well for English language learners? Is it because it creates a less stressful environment for them to practice?
That's definitely a part of it. But I think there's more to it than just that. We need to think about how people naturally learn languages, you know? Yeah, it's all about, interaction and experimentation. And scaffolding kind of sets up a structure for that.
Oh, so it's like we're building a little language learning lab where they can try things out without, the pressure of getting it perfect right away.
Right. And the other thing is, scaffolding can help with those really specific challenges that English language learners face. Like, have you ever thought about how different cultures have different ways of communicating?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like some cultures are really direct and some are like super indirect.
And that can cause a lot of confusion, right?
Definitely.
But with scaffolding, teachers can directly teach those communication norms, like how to take turns in a conversation or even things like body language.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it's not just the words, it's the whole culture that comes with them.
It's all connected, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's this thing called linguistic interference. Basically, it's when a student's first language kind of gets in the way of learning English.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Like Spanish speakers sometimes mix up their B's and V's.
Exactly. So scaffolding can help address those specific things, like the teacher could do extra practice with those sounds or just, point out the differences between the languages.
So it's like you're customizing the support for each student based on their background.
Yeah, it's all about meeting them where they are and helping them move forward. And another cool thing is that scaffolding can be adapted to different learning styles,
Oh, right, like visual learners, auditory learners.
Exactly. So if you have a visual learner, you might use diagrams or those graphic organizers. And for a kinesthetic learner, you could do role-playing or use manipulatives.
And for auditory learners,
lots of discussion, or maybe even storytelling.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's more like having a whole toolbox of strategies.
Right. And the best part is, scaffolding not only helps with language, but it also helps develop those higher level thinking skills.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, by, breaking down those complex tasks and providing the right support, it helps students learn to think critically, solve problems, and even be more creative.
Exactly. It's about giving them the tools to become independent learners.
And as students get better at something, teachers can start to fade out the scaffolding, right? Just taking down those supports on a building.
Yeah. The goal is to help them become self-sufficient, right? So as they progress, you give them a little less support and encourage them to, take charge of their learning.
I love that. Okay, this is all making a lot of sense to me, but I'm curious, are there any downsides to scaffolding? Are there any potential pitfalls or challenges that teachers need to be aware of?
That's a really good question. And it's important to remember that scaffolding isn't, some magic solution. It takes a lot of planning and careful implementation. And you have to constantly be checking to see if it's working.
Right. So it's not just about giving support for the sake of giving support. It has to be intentional and targeted. Exactly. And one of the biggest challenges is finding that sweet spot in the ZPD. If you give too much support, students might become too reliant on it.
And if you don't give enough support, they might get frustrated. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah, it really is. And that's why it's so important to be constantly assessing and adjusting your approach.
So it sounds like scaffolding is more of a dynamic process than, a static thing.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about, that back and forth between the teacher and the student. It's a partnership.
I like that, a learning partnership. And it's not just about learning the language. It's about, fostering that love of learning.
That's the best outcome, right?
Definitely. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to ask you, how can our listeners use these ideas outside of the classroom? We're all learning new things all the time, right?
It is. We are, yeah.
So how can we use this idea of scaffolding in our everyday lives?
Well, think about it. We're always learning new things, right? Maybe a new skill or starting a new hobby or just trying to make sense of, the news.
So anytime we're kind of pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone and into that ZPD.
Yeah, exactly. And those same principles can help us learn and grow.
Okay, so can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're learning to code. Instead of just diving into this giant textbook, you might start with a tutorial online, something that breaks it down into smaller steps, and maybe has some exercises so you can practice.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that would be the scaffolding.
Right.
Or if you're learning to play guitar or something, you might find a teacher who can, show you the techniques, give you feedback, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And even at work, right? If you're training someone new.
Oh, that's a good point.
Instead of just, throwing a bunch of information at them. You can break it down, give them examples, let them practice.
And give them feedback along the way.
Right. It's all about creating that supportive environment where they feel comfortable making mistakes.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about how I learn best. I'm definitely a visual learner, so I always need things like diagrams and, I even color code my notes sometimes.
Oh, I do that too.
It really helps.
Yeah.
So is that like a form of self-scaffolding?
It totally is. If you know what works for you, you can set up those supports for yourself.
And that's a good skill to have.
Definitely.
This whole conversation is making me realize that scaffolding isn't just about like getting help. It's also about having that, growth mindset, believing that you can learn new things even when they're hard.
Oh, yeah. That's so important. When you believe you can learn, you're more likely to, push yourself and ask for help when you need it.
And that's what scaffolding is all about,
Yeah.
right? Creating that environment where you can learn and grow. It doesn't even have to be in a classroom.
It's a way of thinking about learning as something we do together.
That's a great way to put it. And, it really applies to everyone. Teachers, parents, friends. We can all help each other learn and grow.
I think that's a great takeaway from our deep dive today. Scaffolding isn't just a teaching method. It's a way of thinking about learning and helping each other reach our potential.
I love that. And it reminds us that we're all in this together. We all have things we can learn from each other. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into scaffolding. We hope you learned something new today. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.